Cameras were live. Dolly Parton's smile vanished. And what she said made Johnny Carson cry and walk off his own show for the first time in 35 years. It was March 1982. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Studio 6B in Burbank, California. A Tuesday night like any other Tuesday night. 300 people in the audience. Millions watching at home. Johnny Carson behind his desk in his signature suit. Ed McMahon beside him, ready with that thunderous laugh. Doc Severinsen and the band waiting for their cue. And sitting in the guest chair, wearing a sparkly dress that caught the studio lights like a constellation, was Dolly Parton. America's sweetheart. The woman with the infectious laugh and the heart-shaped smile. The country music icon who could make you cry with a ballad and laugh until your sides hurt with a joke. She'd been on The Tonight Show dozens of times. Johnny loved having her. She was easy, fun, always had great stories. Tonight was supposed to be no different. The interview had been going perfectly. Dolly had the audience in stitches talking about her new album, about life in Nashville, about her childhood in the Smoky Mountains. Johnny was relaxed, smiling, doing what he did best, asking questions, setting up punchlines, making his guests look good. 22 minutes into the segment, everything changed. Johnny asked a simple question. A throwaway question, really. The kind of question he'd asked 1,000 times to ease into a commercial break. So Dolly, what's next for you? Any big plans? Dolly's smile didn't just fade. It collapsed. Like someone had cut the strings holding it in place. Her eyes, those bright, sparkling eyes that always seemed to be laughing even when her mouth wasn't, filled with tears. The audience noticed immediately. The laughter died. 300 people suddenly uncertain what they were witnessing. Johnny leaned forward slightly, his professional instincts kicking in. Dolly? You okay? She opened her mouth to speak. Closed it. Opened it again. When the words finally came, they were quiet, barely audible over the studio's sound system. Johnny, I need to tell you something. And I need America to hear it. Because I can't keep pretending anymore. Carson stopped mid-response. The entire studio froze. The control room erupted. Director Bobby Quinn was frantically gesturing to the cameras. Producer Fred DeCordova had his hand on the phone, ready to call for commercial. This wasn't how interviews worked. Guests didn't break down. They didn't make announcements. They promoted their projects and told funny stories and left. But Johnny Carson held up one hand, not to Dolly, but to the control room, to the cameras, to everyone trying to figure out what to do. The gesture said, "Wait. Let this happen." "What do you need to tell me?" Johnny asked, his voice gentle, stripped of all performance. Dolly took a shaking breath. Her hands were trembling in her lap. This woman who had performed for presidents and sold out stadiums, who could command any stage in the world, looked suddenly small in that chair. "My mama's dying," she said. "Cancer. Stage 4. The doctors gave her 3 months. That was 5 weeks ago." The studio went completely silent. Not the polite silence of an audience waiting for a punchline. The stunned silence of 300 people who just had something very private and very painful shared with them. Johnny's face changed. The host's mask, that carefully constructed persona he wore for 30 years, cracked open. "Dolly, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "Nobody knows," Dolly said, tears now streaming freely down her cheeks, ruining her makeup, not caring. "I haven't told anyone outside my family. I've been on this press tour for 3 weeks, doing interviews, smiling, singing, pretending everything's fine. Because that's what people expect from me. Happy Dolly. Funny Dolly. The girl who makes everything seem easy." She looked directly at the camera. At the millions of people watching from home. "But I'm tired, Johnny. I'm so tired of pretending. My mama's dying and I'm out here singing songs and telling jokes and acting like the world isn't ending." To understand what happened next, you need to understand what Dolly Parton's mother meant to her. Avie Lee Parton wasn't just Dolly's mother. She was the reason Dolly existed as she did. The creativity, the music, the unshakable belief that a girl from the poorest hollow in Tennessee could become anything she dreamed. Dolly had grown up in a one-room cabin in Locust Ridge, Tennessee. No electricity. No running water. 12 children. Poverty that most Americans couldn't imagine. But Avie Lee filled that cabin with music. She sang while she cooked over a wood stove. She sang while she washed clothes in the creek. She taught her children every folk song and hymn she knew, and when she ran out of those, she made up new ones. Dolly was the fourth child, and from the moment she could talk, she was singing. Avie Lee recognized something special in that little girl with the big voice. She encouraged it. Nurtured it. When Dolly was 7 years old and announced she was going to be a star someday, Avie Lee didn't laugh or tell her to be realistic. She said, "Then you better practice, baby girl." When Dolly was 12 and desperate for a real guitar but the family had no money, Avie Lee saved for an entire year. She sold eggs. She took in sewing. She saved every spare penny until she had enough to buy a beat-up acoustic guitar from a pawn shop in Sevierville. Dolly cried when her mother gave it to her. "Mama, you didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did," Avie Lee said. "Because you've got something special. And it's my job to make sure the world gets to hear it." When Dolly left for Nashville the day after she graduated high school, 18 years old with $47 in a cardboard suitcase, Avie Lee was the one who drove her to the bus station. She was the one who held Dolly while she cried, terrified of leaving home. She was the one who said, "Go on now. Go be what you're meant to be. And when you get scared, just remember who you are and where you came from." For 25 years, through every success and failure, every hit song and every setback, Avie Lee Parton had been Dolly's anchor. The person who kept her grounded. The voice on the phone saying, "Don't get too big for your raisin." When Dolly started appearing on television. The woman who still lived in Tennessee, still cooked on that same stove, still sang the same songs. And now she was dying. Dolly had gotten the diagnosis 6 weeks ago. She'd flown home immediately, spent 3 days sitting by her mother's bedside in the hospital. The doctors had been blunt: pancreatic cancer, advanced, inoperable. Months at best. "Don't you dare cancel your tour," Avie Lee had told Dolly from that hospital bed, her voice weak but firm. "Don't you dare stop working because of me. I didn't raise you to quit. Mama, I can't just leave you." "Yes, you can. And you will. Because that's what I taught you. You made promises to people. You've got obligations. You go out there and you be Dolly Parton. I'll still be here when you get back." So Dolly had left. She'd flown to Los Angeles. She'd done the interviews. She'd smiled for the cameras. She'd performed like nothing was wrong. But sitting in that chair on The Tonight Show, something inside her finally broke. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Johnny Carson sat completely still behind his desk. His hands were folded in front of him. His eyes never left Dolly's face. "When I was on that plane from Nashville to Los Angeles," Dolly continued, her voice steadier now, like sharing the truth was giving her strength, "I kept thinking about all the times my mama sacrificed for me. All the times she went without so I could have. And here I am, succeeding in exactly the way she dreamed I would, and I can't even be with her at the end." She pulled a tissue from somewhere and dabbed at her eyes, smearing her mascara. "Before I left, she made me promise something. She made me promise I wouldn't tell anyone. She said, 'People don't want to see Dolly Parton sad. They need you to be happy. That's your gift.' So I promised. I've been keeping that promise for 6 weeks." Dolly looked at Johnny, her eyes red but clear. "But I can't anymore, Johnny. I can't smile and pretend. Because if I keep pretending, I'm going to break. And I think maybe it's okay to not be okay sometimes. I think maybe it's okay to let people see that even happy people hurt." The audience was crying. Not everyone, but enough. You could hear it, the quiet sniffles, the sharp intakes of breath. Ed McMahon had tears running down his face, not even trying to hide them. Johnny Carson stood up. In 35 years of hosting The Tonight Show, through thousands of interviews, through every conceivable situation, Johnny had never stood up in the middle of a guest segment. He'd kept his seat, maintained the format. The desk was the boundary between host and guest, between performance and reality. But he stood up now. He walked around his desk. Slowly. The cameras followed him. The audience held its breath. No one knew what was happening. Johnny walked to Dolly's chair and knelt beside it. Not sat in the other guest chair. Knelt. On the floor of Studio 6B, in his expensive suit, this icon of American television knelt beside Dolly Parton's chair and took her hand. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. "My father died when I was 8 years old," Johnny said quietly, his voice carrying through the studio anyway. "Car accident. Sudden. He left for work one morning and never came home." The audience gasped softly. Johnny Carson never talked about his father. Never. In 3 decades of television, he'd kept his personal life sealed away like a vault. "My mother told me the same thing your mother told you," Johnny continued. "She said people didn't want to see me sad. She said I needed to be strong. So I was. I smiled. I went to school. I pretended everything was fine." His hand tightened around Dolly's. "And it nearly destroyed me. Because grief doesn't go away just because you ignore it, Dolly. It waits. It builds. And eventually it breaks through anyway." Johnny looked up at the cameras. At America. At millions of people watching this moment unfold. "I never got to say goodbye to my father. And I've carried that for 50 years. Don't do what I did. Don't sacrifice being with your mother for a television show. Not even this one." He stood up slowly, still holding Dolly's hand, helping her to her feet. "Ladies and gentlemen," Johnny said to the audience, his voice thick with emotion, "I'm going to do something I've never done before. I'm going to end this show early. Because Dolly needs to be on a plane to Nashville. And I'm going to make sure she gets there." But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. Johnny turned to the control room, to the cameras, to everyone frantically trying to figure out what was protocol for this. "Fred," he said, addressing his producer directly through the camera, "get Dolly on the next flight to Nashville. I don't care what it costs. NBC will pay for it. And clear her schedule for the next month. She's going home." He looked at Dolly, who was crying so hard now she could barely stand. "You're going to be with your mother. You're going to hold her hand. You're going to say everything you need to say. And you're not going to worry about this show or any other obligation. Do you understand me?" Dolly nodded, unable to speak. Johnny reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a blue cue card, one of the cards he used for every show, with jokes and questions written in his own handwriting. He pressed it into Dolly's hand. "When you're sitting with your mother," he said, "and it gets hard, and you don't know what to say, read her this. It's something my father used to say to me. I wrote it down years ago so I wouldn't forget." Dolly looked at the card. In Johnny's neat handwriting it said, "The people we love don't leave us. They live in every song we sing, every laugh we share, every moment we choose kindness over cruelty. They become part of who we are. And that never dies." Dolly clutched the card to her chest. Johnny pulled her into an embrace. The audience rose, all 300 people standing, applauding not for entertainment but for humanity, for courage, for 2 people being real on live television. Johnny walked Dolly off the stage himself. Right there, cameras still rolling. He didn't say goodnight. He didn't do his usual closing. He just walked her to the wings, whispered something in her ear, and watched her leave. Then he turned to camera 1, tears streaming down his face. "We'll see you tomorrow night," he said simply. And the show ended. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. NBC chartered a private plane. Dolly made it to Nashville by dawn. she spent the next 6 weeks at her mother's bedside. Avie Lee lived for 4 more months, long enough to hear Dolly sing every song they'd ever shared. The blue cue card stayed in Dolly's pocket the entire time. After her mother passed, she had it framed. It hangs in her office today, next to a photograph of Avie Lee at her old wood stove, singing. Johnny Carson never spoke publicly about that night. But he changed. Younger hosts cite that moment as the day late-night television learned it could be more than just jokes. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop pretending and just be human.